have a major break tonight to tell you about in the death of a North Texas teen. It was supposed to be a fun day of fishing for 3 young men at Lake Ray Hubbard. Instead, it turned deadly after the group jumped in to swim, and 18-year-old Daniel Irving never resurfaced. Now, months later, police have arrested a 19-year-old they say tried to cover up and hide what actually happened that day. Fox 4's Alex Boyer picks up our top story.
3 young men jumped off a railroad bridge into the water below. It was supposed to be a fun day of fishing, a summer memory, a story they'd tell for years. Instead, one of them surfaced once, called out for help, and then went under. 18-year-old Daniel Irving never came back up. His friends didn't call 911. They didn't call his mother. They didn't call anyone. Instead, they drove away from the scene. They threw his clothing into a tree line. They threw his phone into a ditch. And one of them deleted every text and message exchange he'd ever had with Daniel. 3 months later, the police arrested both of them, not for causing Daniel's drowning. The medical examiner had already ruled that an accident. They were arrested for what they did afterward, for tampering with evidence, for deleting messages, for making sure a phone would never tell the story of that day. Now, because 2,000 miles away, in a case that's captivated this entire country for weeks, there's another phone. Another young man, another group of friends who came back without him, another family asking the same question: what really happened? Before we continue, I need to ask you something. These documentaries take days, sometimes weeks, of research, fact-checking, writing, and editing before they ever reach your screen. If you appreciate the effort that goes into uncovering stories like this, the best way to support this channel is by subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it tells YouTube that investigations like this matter. Subscribe now and become part of the reason these stories continue to be told. Let's start with what actually happened in Texas, because it's the reason this update exists at all. 18-year-old Daniel Irving went to Lake Ray Hubbard on April 13th with 2 friends, 19-year-old Lucas Roa and a 17-year-old. According to an arrest affidavit, all 3 jumped from a railroad bridge into the water below. Daniel surfaced once. He called out for help. Then he went under. He never came back up. What happened next is the part that eventually produced criminal charges. According to that same affidavit, Roa and the younger teen didn't call 911. They didn't call Daniel's mother. Instead, they left the scene. Along the way, they discarded Daniel's clothing into a nearby tree line and threw his cell phone into a roadside ditch. Roa later admitted to detectives that he deleted every text and message exchange he'd had with Daniel, specifically because he knew an investigation was coming, and he didn't want to get in trouble. 3 months later, on July 9th, Dallas police arrested both of them. Not for causing Daniel's drowning, for tampering with physical evidence, a 3rd-degree felony tied directly to what they did with his belongings and his phone. It's worth sitting with the sequence of choices described in that affidavit, because it doesn't read like panic freezing 2 teenagers in place. It reads like a series of deliberate decisions, made one after another, in the immediate aftermath of watching a friend disappear underwater, driving away from the scene, stopping somewhere else entirely, disposing of a phone specifically so it couldn't be found, deleting a private conversation history because an investigation felt inevitable. I know it's easy to say, I'll subscribe later. The truth is, most people never come back. If this documentary has already taught you something new, take just 2 seconds to hit subscribe now. That one click tells YouTube these carefully researched investigations deserve to reach more people. Fear can absolutely explain why someone doesn't immediately call for help. It's a harder thing to stretch across an entire sequence of separate deliberate actions, spread out over what appears to have been a meaningful stretch of time. Now, let's bring this to Nolan's case, because the pattern is almost impossible to ignore. 18-year-old Nolan Wells, a wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, went to Horn Island, a remote barrier island off the Mississippi coast, with a group of friends on July 4th. He didn't return with them. His body was found in the water 2 days later. His friends have told investigators he chose to stay behind, planning to catch a ride back with someone else. He didn't have his phone with him. He didn't have his keys. Both turned up later in his friend's possession, not his. Around 11 that night, one of the friends called the Coast Guard, but the Jackson County Sheriff's Office didn't formally request Coast Guard assistance until roughly noon the next day, a 13-hour gap that's never been fully explained publicly. The Sheriff's Office initially said it suspected an accidental drowning and didn't suspect foul play, a conclusion delivered before the state's own autopsy results had even come back. Nolan's family didn't accept that. They flew his body to Washington, D.C. for an independent autopsy, funded in part by Colin Kaepernick. They brought in civil rights attorney Ben Crump, and they began the long, painful fight for answers. Notice how eerily similar the language surrounding both of these young men has been, even though they never knew each other, lived in entirely different states, and died months apart. If you're still watching, you're not here for quick headlines. You're someone who enjoys digging deeper, following the evidence, and understanding the full story. Subscribe and join a community that values fact over rumors. Every new investigation starts with viewers like you, respectful, well-liked, the kind of son a parent never expected to be planning a funeral for. That similarity isn't a coincidence of storytelling technique. It's simply what the people who loved each of them have kept saying, independently, thousands of miles apart, describing two separate young men whose only real connection is the water, the friends who came back without them, and the questions that followed. There's a broader principle buried here, one that applies well beyond either of these two specific cases. In situations involving young people, water, and a friend group that doesn't immediately involve authorities, the public conversation tends to collapse two entirely separate questions into one. Did somebody cause this death? And did somebody try to cover up what happened afterward? Those questions have completely different legal standards, completely different evidence requirements, and completely different potential outcomes. Daniel's case demonstrates this in the clearest possible terms. You can get a definitive official answer to the first question, an accident, while an entirely separate legal process still unfolds around the second question. What happened once he went under and didn't come back up? It's worth thinking about why this distinction so often gets lost in public conversation, even though it's genuinely straightforward once explained. Part of it is simply how these stories get told and retold, condensed into headlines that emphasize the most dramatic possible framing rather than the more precise legal reality underneath. A headline reading, "Teen charged in friend's drowning death," sounds far more dramatic than the accurate version, "Teen charged with tampering with evidence after friend's accidental drowning," even though only the second one actually describes what happened in Daniel's case. That gap between the dramatic version and the accurate version is worth remembering every time this comparison gets discussed going forward. The amazing thing about YouTube is that supporting a creator doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to donate or buy anything. Simply subscribing is enough to help this channel grow and keep these long-form documentaries alive. If you enjoy this kind of content, I'd truly appreciate your support. Legal experts who have commented publicly on Daniel's case have drawn a specific useful distinction, one worth carrying directly into how Nolan's case gets evaluated too. Failing to immediately report a death and actively disposing of evidence connected to it are two very different things under the law. The first can sometimes be explained by panic, confusion, or simple fear of consequences, and courts often treat it accordingly. The second requires a level of deliberate decision-making that's much harder to excuse as pure fear alone. Investigators in a case like this typically aren't just asking whether someone caused a death. They're separately asking a series of narrower questions. Did anyone present know or reasonably believe the person was missing or in danger and failed to report it? Did anyone take physical possession of belongings, a phone, keys, clothing, and either keep them without informing authorities or take active steps to alter or dispose of them? Did anyone give investigators an account that later turned out to be demonstrably false? Each of those questions can produce its own separate charge, entirely independent of whatever the medical examiner ultimately rules about cause of death. Since then, this case has produced its own significant documented physical finding, one that deserves to be understood precisely, not exaggerated. Independent forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell, president of the National Medical Association, conducted a second autopsy on July 10th. His conclusion, read publicly at a press conference in Chicago, was that cause and manner of death remain undetermined pending further investigation. Alongside that conclusion, Mitchell documented a specific physical detail, a focal area of red discoloration in the deep soft tissue on the back of Nolan's head, roughly 12 inches by 8 inches. Stories like this deserve to be remembered, not just for the mystery, but for the people at the center of them. By subscribing, you're helping ensure these carefully researched documentaries continue reaching viewers who care about understanding the facts. Thank you for being part of this community. Now, here's a thread that connects directly to the central contradiction that's defined this entire case from the beginning. A young woman referred to publicly by her first name, Katie, was the last person confirmed to have spoken with Nolan before he disappeared. For weeks, her account existed only second-hand, filtered through her own mother and sister posting on social media to correct rumors that had spiraled out of control. That changed recently. Katie sat down directly face-to-face with Nolan's mother, Christine. And according to Christine, what Katie told her does not match what the boys have said. Here's the detail worth understanding carefully. According to Katie, Nolan told her he intended to head back and rejoin his friend's boat before they left the island. According to the friends, Nolan told them the opposite, that he wanted to stay behind with her by his own choice. Katie never actually watched Nolan get on that boat. She's describing an intention he stated to her, not something she personally witnessed happen. That distinction matters. It means this isn't necessarily one person lying and one telling the truth. It could mean something changed in the gap between Nolan stating that intention to Katie and whatever happened next. There's a quieter parallel worth drawing here, connecting back to the phone thread running through both of these cases. Christine has described tracking Nolan's phone herself before investigators ever located it, and finding that what she and her sister discovered once they got into his Snapchat accounts didn't match what they expected from a son who documented outings like this one regularly. Tamika Erving has described a similarly maddening experience of her own, being told by police that Daniel's phone couldn't even be searched for until after his body had already been recovered, due to legal restrictions on locating a device before someone is officially confirmed missing under certain thresholds. These documentaries take days, sometimes weeks, of research, fact-checking, writing and editing before they ever reach your screen. If you appreciate the effort that goes into uncovering stories like this, the best way to support this channel is by subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it helps us keep making investigations like this for people who care about the truth. It's worth understanding why toxicology carries this much weight, because it explains why this case keeps circling back to the exact same missing piece. Drowning produces fluid buildup in the lungs caused by the body's oxygen deprivation shutting down normal function. A drug overdose can produce that same fluid buildup through a very similar process. Looking at the lungs alone often cannot reliably tell the two apart. That's why drowning in forensic pathology tends to get treated as a diagnosis of exclusion, something confirmed only after the alternatives, especially an overdose, have been ruled out first. Toxicology is the actual tool that does that ruling out, and it typically takes weeks to complete. It's worth being precise, too, about the size of that discoloration finding and what it actually does and doesn't establish. 12 inches by 8 inches covers a genuinely substantial portion of the back of someone's skull, large enough that a careful pathologist would want a clear explanation for it rather than simply noting it in passing. But size alone doesn't establish cause. Discoloration that large can sometimes result from something as ordinary as post-mortem blood settling, depending on how a body was positioned after death and for how long, particularly after several days in warm Gulf water. It's exactly this kind of unresolved, genuinely ambiguous finding, real, documented but not yet explained, that makes comparing this case to Daniel's so useful. Daniel's medical examiner reached a clean, confident ruling. Nolan's independent examiner reached the opposite, an honest acknowledgement that the evidence available to him wasn't sufficient to reach a confident conclusion either way. I know it's easy to say, I'll subscribe later. The truth is, most people never come back. If this documentary has already taught you something new, take just 2 seconds to hit subscribe now. That one click tells YouTube these carefully researched investigations deserve to reach more people. Now let's bring this back to where we started, because this is where the comparison between these two cases gets genuinely sharp. In Daniel Irving's case, the phone isn't a mystery anymore, it's a documented charged crime. According to the arrest affidavit, Roa and the younger teen physically discarded Daniel's phone specifically to keep it away from investigators, and Roa separately deleted his own communications with Daniel once he realized an investigation was coming. That's no longer a family suspicion. It's an alleged fact sitting in a criminal filing attached to a felony charge. In Nolan's case, everything we know about the phone comes from the family's own account. Christine said she tracked the device herself using Life 360 before investigators ever located it. When she and her sister finally got access to it, she says they found nothing from that entire day. No saved photos, no saved Snapchat content, despite Nolan's well-documented habit of constantly capturing exactly these kinds of moments. Here's the question worth asking directly. Could this become Nolan's version of what the phone became in Daniel's case? The single piece of evidence that actually produces criminal charges, regardless of what the autopsy ultimately says about cause of death? The honest answer is it could, but only if it actually gets confirmed. Right now, what Christine has described is exactly that. A description based on the family looking at the device themselves, not a professional forensic extraction capable of proving conclusively that something was deliberately deleted rather than lost through ordinary app behavior. That's precisely why the mutual coordinated phone inspection both sides have agreed to matter so much. It's the process that could turn this from a family suspicion into something with the same evidentiary weight Daniel's case already has. An actual confirmed act of tampering. Chargeable entirely on its own, separate from however Nolan's cause of death is ultimately ruled. If you're still watching, you're not here for quick headlines. You're someone who enjoys digging deeper, following the evidence, and understanding the full story. Subscribe and join a community that values facts over rumors. Every new investigation starts with viewers like you. One of the sharpest differences between these two cases isn't the evidence at all. It's the pace. Daniel died in April. It took 3 full months and sustained public pressure from advocacy groups before any arrests happened. Advocates involved in that case have said directly that the urgency it deserves simply wasn't there in its earliest, most critical days. Nolan died in July, and within roughly 2 weeks his case had already drawn FBI involvement, national media coverage, a district attorney publicly committing to a grand jury process, and an independent autopsy funded by a former NFL star. That speed this early in an investigation is close to unprecedented. That contrast raises an uncomfortable question. Did Nolan's case move faster because investigators genuinely prioritized it differently from day one? Or did it move faster specifically because of the intense public and media pressure that built almost immediately? Pressure that simply didn't exist for Daniel's family during those same critical early weeks. Advocates following both cases have pointed toward the second explanation. That public attention, more than procedural fairness, is often the actual variable determining how quickly any family gets real answers. Consider the mechanics of how each of these two stories actually reached a national audience in the first place, because that difference may explain the speed gap better than anything about the underlying facts. Nolan's case had an immediate visually striking hook, a remote barrier island, a 13-hour Coast Guard delay, a group photo that spread widely online within days of his disappearance. Daniel's case, by contrast, unfolded quietly for months in local Dallas area coverage before advocacy groups pushed it into wider view, specifically by publicizing his mother's frustration with how slowly the investigation was moving. The amazing thing about YouTube is that supporting a creator doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to donate or buy anything. Simply subscribing is enough to help this channel grow and keep these long-form documentaries alive. If you enjoy this kind of content, I'd truly appreciate your support. This case has also drawn formal federal involvement, and it's worth being precise about exactly what that does and doesn't signal. The FBI's Jackson Field Office released an official public statement confirming its assistance has centered specifically on interstate threats made against people connected to this investigation. Threats serious enough to cross state lines and fall under federal jurisdiction. The statement was explicit that Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency throughout, from the beginning of this case to whatever comes next. Support, not takeover. That federal involvement arrives at the same time this case moves toward a formal grand jury process. Following a meeting between Nolan's parents and Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath, Crump confirmed the case will be handed to a grand jury once the underlying investigation concludes. The DA's own office has clarified directly that this referral is standard procedure for unnatural or suspicious deaths in that county, not on its own confirmation that criminal charges are coming. Both of these developments, the FBI statement and the grand jury referral, represent real institutional movement. Neither one by itself tells us what this investigation will ultimately conclude. It's worth being precise about why the FBI's involvement isn't the ominous signal a lot of online speculation initially treated it as. Federal agencies routinely assist local law enforcement on cases involving interstate threats, entirely separate from whatever underlying case those threats are connected to. That's exactly the framework at work here. Stories like this deserve to be remembered, not just for the mystery, but for the people at the center of them. By subscribing, you're helping ensure these carefully researched documentaries continue reaching viewers who care about understanding the facts. Thank you for being part of this community. It's worth noting, too, that the NAACP has now formally entered Nolan's case specifically, passing a resolution calling on local, state and federal authorities, explicitly including the Department of Justice, to conduct a complete and transparent review. That kind of institutional weight didn't attach to Daniel's case in quite the same way, at least not from a national civil rights organization specifically. Whether that additional pressure ultimately changes the pace or outcome of Nolan's investigation compared to the 3-month wait Daniel's family endured is itself one of the open questions this comparison leaves us with tonight. It's also worth acknowledging directly that these two cases differ in a way that matters for exactly this kind of institutional response. Daniel's case, as reported, didn't carry the same specific racial dynamic that's been central to public discussion of Nolan's, a young black man whose friend group was reportedly predominantly white. That dynamic has shaped which organizations and public figures have chosen to get involved in Nolan's case specifically. And it's a genuine separate layer to this story, distinct from the shared pattern around phones, delayed reporting, and early official conclusions that connects both cases more broadly. Crump and Sharpton have both raised that racial dimension directly and repeatedly in Nolan's case, while being careful, as covered earlier, not to claim it alone proves what actually happened to him. These documentaries take days, sometimes weeks, of research, fact-checking, writing and editing before they ever reach your screen. If you appreciate the effort that goes into uncovering stories like this, the best way to support this channel is by subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it helps us keep making investigations like this for people who care about the truth. So does Daniel's arrest actually predict anything for Nolan's case? Not directly. These remain two separate legal proceedings moving at two different speeds built on two different sets of facts. But Daniel's case does prove something worth holding on to as Nolan's moves forward. An accidental ruling and real accountability aren't mutually exclusive, and a phone, once it's actually forensically examined, has already been enough in one case just like this one to turn a family's suspicion into an arrest. Before we close, it's worth listening closely to what these two families have actually said they want, because it's more modest and more specific than the headlines around either case might suggest. Daniel's mother, Tamika Erving, hasn't demanded automatic murder convictions. Her attorney has asked investigators to follow the facts wherever they lead, and to bring whatever charges those facts actually support. What she's pushed back against isn't a specific outcome. It's 3 months of feeling like nobody outside her own advocacy network was treating her son's death with real urgency. Christine and Elmore Wannelsey have said almost the identical thing about Nolan. Not a predetermined conclusion. In Christine's own words, the same respect that would be given to anybody else, two families thousands of miles apart, who've never met each other, represented by the same attorney, have independently landed on nearly identical language for what justice actually looks like to them. Not a guaranteed result. A guarantee that the process treats their son's life as seriously as anyone else's would be treated. I know it's easy to say, I'll subscribe later. The truth is, most people never come back. If this documentary has already taught you something new, take just 2 seconds to hit subscribe now. That one click tells YouTube these carefully researched investigations deserve to reach more people. There's something worth naming plainly as we bring both of these stories together tonight. Ben Crump has been careful in his own public statements not to claim these two cases are identical, or that Nolan's friends did precisely what Roa and the younger teen in Texas are now charged with doing. What he's pointed to consistently is a shared shape, a recurring sequence of decisions that keeps showing up in situations like these, regardless of location, regardless of the specific families involved. A friend group that doesn't immediately call for help, a phone that goes missing or gets altered in the hours afterward. An early official conclusion delivered before the full evidence has even been gathered. Whether that shape reflects something structural about how frightened young people tend to respond in these situations, or something more troubling about which victims get believed immediately and which get an early convenient conclusion instead, is exactly the question both of these cases are forcing into public view together. Nolan Wells was 18. Daniel Irving was 18. Neither of them is here to say what actually happened in their final minutes. What's left are two families still waiting, in Christine's words, for the same respect anyone else would receive. and a phone sitting at the center of Nolan's case right now that a case just like his already proved can be the difference between a quiet accidental ruling and real chargeable accountability for whatever happened after. If you're still watching, you're not here for quick headlines. You're someone who enjoys digging deeper, following the evidence, and understanding the full story. Subscribe and join a community that values facts over rumors. Every new investigation starts with viewers like you. We're going to keep following both of these cases. As Nolan's phone inspection finally happens, as toxicology results arrive from both sides, as this investigation moves toward a grand jury, we'll bring you the facts as we actually get them verified. And not a moment before, one phone, one decision, one night, and two families would never be the same again. Every week we uncover real cases with verified reporting, careful research, and respect for the people whose lives were changed forever. If these stories matter to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next investigation. We will be following these cases until justice is fully served. Subscribe and turn on notifications. The next video goes live the moment there is a break in either case. You cannot afford to miss that video. Share this with everyone tracking these cases. The more eyes on the evidence, the harder it becomes to stay invisible. We are not stopping, not until every question is answered. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you are watching from. Tell us what you think the phone inspection will reveal. This community has been ahead of this investigation from the beginning, and your analysis matters. Stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop searching for the truth. The amazing thing about YouTube is that supporting a creator doesn't cost you anything. You don't have to donate or buy anything. Simply subscribing is enough to help this channel grow and keep these long-form documentaries alive. If you enjoy this kind of content, I'd truly appreciate your support. Stories like these deserve to be remembered, not just for the mystery, but for the people at the center of them. By subscribing, you're helping ensure these carefully researched documentaries continue reaching viewers who care about understanding the facts.